Okay, I've started the recording.
Okay, and this is, I think, officially.
We aren't quite at 5 yet, but
I'll wait a couple of seconds. When my phone says 5, we're off to the races.
all right.
Okay, I officially have 5. So I would like to call the January 2021 Airport Commission meeting to order. Mark, proof of posting?
Yes, I posted it out front. Rich, did you post it at the airport?
We did, yes, Mark.
Thank you. And it was on our website, and so we did all the usual locations, and we
Great.
sent out the notify me to the list.
All right, great. Thank you, Mark.
Yep.
Next item is the public comment
Let's do a quick. Can we do a quick roll here? So, because I haven't looked to see who all is here. So Halleck is here. I heard Michelle. Robert is here. Ray Fay, David Lorman, Kevin Munson, but I haven't looked for Luke yet. Luke, are you on the call? Let me see if I can find him. Oh yeah, I see Luke on the call. We sometimes have a problem with audio with him. Luke, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay, excellent. Okay, we have everyone present.
All right, great. I'd like to then move on to the public comment section. 3 minutes regarding comments on the agenda items. Mark, you go ahead and take control of this.
Sure, I have Robbie K. If you'd like to, I am unmuted you. Go ahead, you have 3 minutes. Robbie. We can't hear you if you are speaking. Robbie, are you available? Okay, we'll move on to Jenny. I assume that's Jenny Pavlovic.
Jenny, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to comment that my noise complaints for December were down from November, and I was really pleased that it looks like Maury Airplane Company changed some of their training flight paths, and it seemed to indicate that the voluntary noise compliance with the noise abatement program really does make a difference that helps the neighborhood. I had 6 complaints for Maury over the course of December. 4 of them were all in one afternoon on December 26th, and 1 was December 28th, and 1 was just earlier in the month. So like for most of the month, we didn't have a lot of Maury training flights circling over the neighborhood, and I could see that they were taking off, that I can see them and hear them when they take off, but I know looked like they were taking different paths. So I wanted to thank Maury Airplane Company for that, it seemed like they really responded to complaints from November and made some changes. I had 9 complaints in December for Capital Flight, which was up from November. They were circling on Christmas Day low, and that was a position only flight. There was 1 Capital Flight that flew directly over my house, really loud, came in at low altitude and then gunned it right over my house and climbed and then turned off the transponder, or I lost the signal. So I'm not really sure what they're doing when they're doing that, but it's really disruptive. And I would say for Capital Flight, the same 3 planes or so. I report every month, and there doesn't seem to be any real response to that. I know Rich Maury talks to the pilots, but I don't see them making any changes, so that's disappointing. And I had the same two complaints for Badgerland Aero again, circling low and flying really low over the rooftops. Capital Flight in particular sometimes seems like they're well within 500 feet over the rooftops, which is really disruptive, and sometimes it's kind of frightening. And then I had some other complaints, and there was only one really notable, which was a really loud jet that took off to the west. It didn't take off at 300 degrees, and it turned early. It turned left over the neighborhood. It was a Cessna, Design Homes Incorporated Cessna 525A. Super loud, rocked the sky. I mean, everything stopped when that plane took off, and I'm not even sure if it's technically legal for this runway, but that one was really disruptive. And I just wanted to make a comment on the 2019 versus 2020 noise complaints. In 2020, we were able to start tracking end numbers, tail numbers, and give more accurate reports. And in 2019, I think a lot of planes didn't get reported because we were told if we really couldn't identify them, that there wasn't really anything that could be done about it. So I think a lot of people just didn't report in 2019 much. And 2019 really isn't as relevant. 2020, some of us learned how to track flights online and identify tail numbers. And of course, we've talked about for 2020, a lot of us are home now, like 24/7 and exposed to a lot more noise. So that's why there's been an increase in complaints. But I guess in general, I want to thank the Maury Airplane Company for the changes they made in the last month. And it seemed to be in response to what complaints from November, and just make sure people are aware that 2020 data is a lot more relevant than 2019 because of the ability to report. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your comment. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, so Robbie, are you available to, can you?
Oh, yes, sir. Thank you so much. I kind of eating stuff here and I just have to clear my throat just real quickly there.
Robbie, what's your last name?
Who cares? I
The
just
minutes
want to
do.
very quickly, I'm going to report on this more in Jenny's Facebook page, I think, in the next few days. But just very quickly, I just want to think back to when I was a little kid, and I was lucky enough visiting my Grandpa Swen on Pelican Lake in Minnesota, and he allowed me to stay there. He had a place for me, and he gave me quite a big boat for me and to fish. And then in those days, of course, that was our mainstay. So we would fish, and that was our supper. So I would bring home fish to them, and as they were quite aged at that time. It was a great life growing up. One day happened to look out with a bunch of neighbors, and there was a boat going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And very quickly I recognized it as one of the local bullies, a kid that was a little bit older than I. And he was in, his boat. And then we saw he was chasing a loon that was obviously not able to fly. Something was wrong with it. And then he would run right over it and laugh and laugh and laugh. And he would chase it again and come back over and over and over. And there was very little we could do. But eventually I went down to my boat. I had a bigger boat that Grandpa Swen left me, and I took care of the issue. The other day, my wife and I, just a few days ago, and we've noted over the last couple of weeks, the beauty of what the Lord has done for us out there. I mean, this frost, and it's just so beautiful, just gorgeous. And of course, with the cloud cover and everything, the Canadian geese are flying quite low. Now over the airport, I'm not sure if on the north side or whatever, there's a place for them to feed or whatever, but they fly very low. And we were driving in on Airport Road to go grocery shopping. And the beauty of a flock of geese when they come in, in their V formation and so on. This particular flock maybe had 50, 60 geese in it. And my degrees are all in biology, botany, and plant biochemistry.
Robbie, you have 30 seconds left.
Okay, and just very quickly, as we drove in, guess what? Here comes one of your planes right into the flock. Did not care. You could see him coming from the east. No problem, just straight into the flock. And as we drove into town, we kind of bypassed him. I couldn't see what had happened. And my wife jumped into the back of the car and watched, and she says, "Oh, the flock is just
Time is up.
scattering. They're up and down, up and down."
Okay, is there anybody else who wishes to speak?
I do.
Okay, go ahead.
This is Andy Z. Just got a kind of a general statement that, you know, I've been watching this maybe a little bit from a distance. I live in the general vicinity, let's call it, live on Legacy Drive. And, you know, the airport serves a relatively small group of people, you know, let's say most of whom don't even live in our Middleton neighborhoods. And the expansion being considered is pretty concerning if the number of flights increases or the size of the aircraft increases for maybe even the bigger one. And I'm not even sure many residents know this is happening. And if they did, they'd probably be pretty concerned. I try to pay attention to what's going on in the local community. I know some people just get busy and don't, but it's concerning. And just wanted to make that general statement. I will say there was, I don't know, 3-4 months ago, there was some documentation that you could report, you know, the flight paths being taken and if they're in line with what is expected and that kind of thing. And, you know, I had voiced, you know, what we see every day come over the top of Legacy Drive area, which is outside of the flight pattern. But I think, like mentioned earlier, maybe Jenny had said it, I believe, that we've not noticed or seen as many flights go over the house on Legacy in December. And I just ask that this continues. You know, we appreciate that. And if Maury and others are having something to do with that, very much appreciated. And just ask that this continues, not just during the time, you know, when this expansion is being considered, but for the long haul. So that's my comments. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Mark?
I don't see any other hands up. Is there anybody else?
I've got a hand up, Steve Ziegler. Can you
Oh,
hear me,
sorry.
Mark?
I see you now, Steve. Go ahead.
I'm very sorry about that. I'm rather dismayed that you cut the gentleman off a couple of times before that was explaining about the geese prior to him getting to the end of his statement. I understand this 3-minute protocol thing, but why are you doing that? The gentleman was obviously very, very involved with the geese and had something significant to say to the commission. And I would appreciate you letting him finish his statement, even if it's after the quote unquote 3-minute interval, which we used to have the stopwatch at the city hall. Thank you, Mark.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ziegler. Next, Mark.
Gary Keys.
Thank you. Good evening. I'll just make a real short statement here. I have attended a number of these meetings, and I think it's always my concern at these meetings that not a lot of people stand up and say anything. So I don't want to continue to beat it to death, but obviously our main concern right now is expanding anything there. I've said that before. I'd like to say it again. Because I think what we're seeing is certainly an increase in traffic and noise over what it used to be. The airport's been there longer than I have been around here, and I welcome it. Neighbors welcome it, but I think there is a complete disregard for the fact that these neighborhoods are now in here. They're allowed to be in here, and now we're catching all this extra traffic. I know it's volunteer, but we're catching a lot of people that don't have a whole lot of regard for these neighborhoods. And I don't think it's their neighborhood. I think it's our neighborhood. And I think there should be a certain amount of respect for the fact that we live here. We don't want to put up with the noise. We don't want to put up with the low flights. And I think that's the point we're trying to make here, is that not only are we hoping that they aren't going to expand the airport, but we are also hoping that at some point that we can sit down and have a dialogue with people at the airport to make these people accountable for what they're doing. That's the point I'm trying to make. So I appreciate your time and thank you.
Thanks, Gary. Mark?
I don't see any other hands up.
There's a
I
bit,
have a hand up.
Go ahead.
I'm Jeanette Wheat, and I don't file reports. I don't have time to go online and look at the maps, and every time I hear a plane go over, figure out what plane it is. That's just, congratulations to, I'm sorry, Pavlovic Jenny, I guess her name, I'm sorry. Anyway, for doing so, but I just can't do it. But I just want to register that I have complaints. I hear the planes, and I think it is in part because of my elevation. I'm up on one of the bluffs, which makes me probably 150 feet higher in the sky than many other homes. And yeah, adding more traffic is just a really bad thing for me and my neighborhood. And that's all I have to say.
I don't see any other hands up. Anybody else wish to speak? And I'll just take this opportunity, Mr. Chair, to remind people that when you are registered, when you speak, your comments are, we try to document your comments in the minutes or to capture the flavor, the essence of your comments. It's hard to accept anonymous comments and track those with an individual if they don't identify themselves. We have refrained from listing people's addresses, but we do identify, generally the neighborhood they're in. So the individual from Legacy Drive, I can, probably just mention the neighborhood, or I might mention Legacy Drive. We aren't requiring addresses, although the council does. So we have tried to adapt our public input practices to respect the concerns that have been raised about from some of the speakers, but to make a completely anonymous comment is difficult to document, and I just will leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Mark. At this time, I then declare that the public comment section is
Yeah.
closed.
All right, I had my hand up. I think nobody saw me.
We had asked for additional comments.
You can see whose hand is up.
No, it's a comment.
All right, I see a hand up from Paul.
Yeah, so this is Leslie Hayner, and I just wanted to say that I'd like to cede my 3 minutes to Robbie so that he can finish his comments about the geese, please.
Minutes can't be transferred.
Oh, come on, John, give us a break.
You
That's
guys
just,
have allowed that in
Come
the.
on.
that's just
What are you
every
doing?
individual gets 3 minutes.
Oh,
And
come on.
that's the standards. So
Come on, John.
sorry.
Standard for what?
Well, it's not your own standard because you've allowed it in the past, John.
Yeah,
But I
yeah, we
haven't.
don't buy it.
No, we're at 3
Come on,
minutes
John.
and that's it. Mark?
Oh,
we're
that's
gonna-
it. That's it. Oh, yeah. Good thing you got public comment.
Mark, you want to go ahead and mute the
Yeah,
lines?
yeah. Take
and
care of it,
continue
Mark.
on. So the public comment is over, and we're going to move on to the approval of the minutes. So I'll give everybody a few minutes to look at the minutes, and then I'll be waiting for any comments that any might have or any motions any might have.
Are the minutes on your screen?
Yes, they are.
they are.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yes.
I got to figure out how I can.
Yes,
All right, thank you.
Hopefully everybody has a copy, printed them out.
I got it.
yes.
Key is the motions. So I think what I'll do is assume that people looked at it ahead of time, and then I'll go to the motions here that are in bold.
I'd make a motion that the minutes be approved.
This is Robert. I would second that motion.
Yeah, I have a first and a second on the approval of the minutes. Are there any additional comments or discussions? Hearing none, I'd like to call for a vote. All in favor of accepting the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, so the minutes are approved. Next, we'll move on to the chairperson's report. Mine is about the same as last month. Not much happened during the month of December. We still are waiting for snow removal equipment. Government moves at its own pace. The runway lights are with the state to be signed. And the finances for the BOA will not be reconciled until the month of February. So those are the three main items. If anybody has any questions on that or anything else, please ask. Okay, hearing none, let's move on to the airport manager's report. Rich.
Sure. First off, I want to apologize. I made a couple mistakes on this. After the one individual made a total of 25 complaints, you can just strike that half of a sentence there, and we'll talk about that a little later. And then the tractor is not at McFarlane's, it's actually at Kelcher's, but I'll report on that. First off, as an airport manager, I want to speak to Robbie, who cares. I believe that has what he listed his last name as. No air pilot or airplane would ever intentionally fly through a flock of geese. Geese weigh a great deal and would do a huge amount of damage to an aircraft at those speeds. You can just imagine. There have been fatalities based on aircraft striking geese. So believe me, Robbie, we're doing everything we can to avoid geese. Also, I wish I could take credit for our reduction for Dr. Pavlovic noted. As far as I know, we're flying the same pattern. We did about 90% of our business that we did in the last December, which puts us more or less on par for this year. But again, the only thing I can say is either by happenstance or possibly just more wind out of the east and using runway 10, they were able to reduce it. Also, that jet that she commented on being low and directly over her house or that area was doing a standard FAA departure procedure out of here for VFR, flying the standard pattern. What we do on a daily basis is quite a modification of what the FAA would calls as standard. So it was perfectly legal for that jet to do that, but we ask them not to. We ask them to abide by our turn to 300 and climb out before turning in any direction. This is contrary to training. This is most people that haven't have been trained here. So again, this is what we're doing. We're on a daily basis. And obviously anyone who doesn't follow it, it results immediately in a noise complaint. So we do our best to educate the people that aren't from around here and or instructors at work out of this airport. Anyway, again, looking from November 30 through December 31, 36 noise, I'm sorry, any questions about anything I said first? Okay. 36 noise or low flying aircraft complaints, 25 by one individual. The rest were made I think 3 individuals made 2, and the rest were just individual reports. Again, as best as I can determine, most, but not all of these complaints were for aircraft that were flying noise abatement procedures. That aircraft out of the Madison Flying Club was, I didn't witness the early turnout, but one of the Capitol flight instructors did, immediately contacted us. I immediately contacted the pilot of that aircraft and asked them if they were familiar with the noise abatement procedure. Their response was they were, but didn't realize you had to do it every time, which I found rather lame. I instructed them that yes, they have to do it every time unless they want to generate a noise complaint and get us annoyed with them. Someone in the pattern may or may not have told them to go somewhere else to do their practice. I didn't hear it. Apparently, they made a report of that to one of the other airport commissioners. But I didn't do that. Again, I really want to emphasize the bulk of the pilots here are trying to do the best we can to be good neighbors. We're not tolerant of people that are not following these the voluntary noise abatement procedures. All right. Oh yeah. Just as for your information, and I can understand Dr. Pavlovic's explanation, but last December 2019, there were 5 noise complaints made. So we had a, what is it, 720% increase in noise complaints with 90% of more airplane company traffic flying. There were many bad weather days with no flying, but that caused a pent-up demand. And on the December 26th, we were exceedingly busy. I think that generated 8 of the noise complaints on that day alone from, I think, 3 different people. No accidents or incidents on the field that I'm aware of, and I would be aware of them. I conducted an online safety seminar, which was the subject of which was pre-flight inspection in great detail. It went over fairly well. And then our online ground school is concluded. We'll start new classes online virtually March 2nd. We're not going to be doing in-person training in that regard. Okay, we had 3 main snow events when I wrote this. And the Sperry New Holland, our big tractor that's 10, 12 years old now, broke down all 3 times. It's not McFarland's, it's Kelcher's trying to determine why this has occurred. The tractor is at Kelcher's at the moment, and they're going to have a report at the next meeting as to what they discovered, because they haven't had a chance to get at it yet. Brush removal has been limited to hand equipment in small areas, really haven't done anything recently with it. Emphasis, as you can imagine, is on snow removal. And I believe McFarland's, who had made some had indicated they wanted to use the airport to train their people on brush removal. I think they're pretty busy with keeping snow removal equipment in service. So they haven't responded to us. Hopefully there'll be a lull maybe in February when they can come out and get this work done. But I wouldn't count on it getting done this winter. I just have a feeling that they're going to stay fairly busy. All right, that's mine in a nutshell. Oh, any questions?
Yeah, I do, Rich. So is the tractor at Cultures now?
It is at Cultures now.
So what happens to the snows?
Well, what has happened in the past, it's broken down all 3 times. We've had to use what we have available. The Maury Airplane Company's equipment, the red truck has been used, the big, not the big one, but this, it's just a pickup truck with the plow. We're using our everything else we have. Luckily, we haven't had anything heavy or anything really deep yet. If that occurs, we're going to have to get an end loader in to do the in between the hangars. We just can't do that with the equipment that we have. So we're stuck if we get a big snowfall. Well, so far we've been able to do all right.
We need to lean on Cultures a little bit because they charged us $20-some thousand last year.
You're reading my mind, John. I was going to talk with you offline on that, but I'll talk to you now. Greg really wants you to get involved with that. He said you are better at negotiating than he is. So. All
right. Well, I'll follow up with you tomorrow on that.
Okay.
We'll see. I'll go visit them.
Yeah.
They always like me to visit, so. we'll
I like you to visit, John. But yeah.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions of Rich? Okay, hearing none, let's go ahead and move on to the next item, which is the airport financials. You can see we've got them now through November. We're behind a little bit, which is typical. We've been fairly lucky. We still have the $69,000 worth of grants. We don't have to use them within this period. So we still have those coming. So you will see that on October, this to 44. And then so there'd be 69 in total. So that gives us about 25,000 additional to be used. And so there's also a new program just came through. I forget how much money, and most of it will go to commercial airlines, which I certainly understand that whole industry has been devastated, but there should be some portion dribble down to GA. So that will be good. I have no idea really on the outside services. Maybe I'll check with Bill, but I'm sure that's legal for something. Other than that, the numbers are pretty much as expected. And so if anybody has any questions about this specific spreadsheet.
How does this, John, how does this kind of compare to where we were at when we were at a similar time last year?
Beg your pardon?
Do you have a sense for how this compares to where we were at a similar time last year?
Yeah, I can. Let me just really quick tell you where I think there was some, so the approved budget is a function of last year's numbers. Okay, so if you take a look like at the $35,000 for the grounds maintenance, that was predominantly what we spent to fix the equipment. And so you can see we're well behind on that. So we did have some money in April. So we're ahead on that one. So you can take the year to date against the budget, and the budget was really pretty much where we were last year with a 3% increment in most cases. The only thing I see here notable as I start to go across here is the utility bills are way up, and that's beyond our control. And we may not have, and I always have a hard time with this one because some of these numbers are provided by the city, and I'm not sure we totally understand that number, but I would think that number is, why would it change significantly? But other than that, I think we're pretty much on line. Legal is higher, and I thought legal should be actually lower. And like I said, I'm gonna have to follow up with Bill Burns and see where the legal is going, because we certainly haven't referred anything to the city for legal comment. So I'm sure it has to do with AMPAC then.
Okay.
Sure it is.
Yeah, Mark, do you have any insight there or thoughts on the utility component?
Mark?
Sorry, I do not. I'd have to check, do some digging and compare with last year. I wasn't prepared to answer that question. I don't know specifically why there's a lag or why the utility bills are higher. I'd be happy to look into that.
Yeah, Bill provides that, and I'll ask also about that and about the legal, and I'll have those answers for you next at the next meeting.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
All right, so I'll put down that John is following up. Awesome.
Okay, you want to move on to the next item, Mark?
Sure, I think we had the fuel
Yeah,
summary from Rich. Maybe he could walk us through that.
sure. Rich, go ahead.
Sure. Well, that's pretty much the laid out right there, what we did for 2020, down about 10% over what we had for 2019. Again, the sales were down in 100 octane, which would be for the the smaller aircraft. The jet fuel sales actually were slightly up from last year. So means mostly it means that based aircraft, the base jets are doing a little bit more. We also try to be very, keep our prices low on the jet fuel and the 100 octane for that matter. So we might be doing a little bit better job of selling to the transients. But again, we don't see a lot of jets in here, and we don't, because, you know, they just generally, if they do fuel up, it's at what they call a courtesy fill. They'll take 50 gallons aside or something just to, you know, sell it, have us sell some fuel and then be on their way. But yep, I'm hoping that 2021, we're going to see our numbers back where they were in 2019, maybe even better. We'll see.
Our fuel flowage fee, we estimated $8,000, or basically it was eight, it was 8 or 7 cents a gallon, 8 cents or 7, Rich?
8 cents now.
Okay, so we were planning on 100,000 gallons.
Yep.
And so we pretty well got about as anticipated.
Yeah, just a bit below that. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Rich.
Okay.
Does anybody have any questions for Rich? If not, let's move on to obstacles and tree trimming. Mark, you want to go ahead and take that one?
Sure. I've got some good news to report, good news from my standpoint, and I hope it's the commission's as well. I spoke with the FAA representative, Ponce Barber, who had communicated with us last winter about 8 obstacles in the vicinity of the airport. Basically, every runway approach had at least one obstacle, as shown on the map here. And the 5 that are located in the northeast of the airport, which are these first 5 on private property. As of this week, I have learned that the approach that triggered the report, the VOR approach, is going to be canceled or decommissioned in August. I think it was August. Yeah, August 12th. It'll be publicized. And so Ponce said that it would be fine if we did not ameliorate the situation with the trees, and so that means we don't need to work with the property owners to trim the trees, which is, I consider, good news. I'm happy that we don't have to have that conversation with them. So the other 3 trees, I have reached out to the 2 property owners that, well, one of them, the last one, was on Bletner land, and we removed that.
Okay.
I've spoken with Jim Ripp. He is the farmer, or the resident who lives on Schneider Road to the north of runway 1, and we have an agreement with him to trim his trees as necessary. So he is aware of that we'll be doing that, proceeding with that. And then the other one is to the west, on the Arndt property, where we have a navigation easement that came with that we acquired when we developed the airport. I didn't know that. I hadn't connected that this was in the navigation easement when we first talked about it last winter, but since then I had learned that we have that navigation easement. So that gives us the right to trim the trees. And of course, what I've done is I've reached out to them and want to make sure that we're sensitive to the shape of the tree and to any concerns that they have. And I want to work collaboratively with them. I have not heard back from them. I emailed them this week, but I've not heard back. So that's my report on the obstacles.
Great. Sounds to me like we've got all the boxes checked for the trees, and we have no other known obstacles at this time, or have not been notified by the FAA for any obstacles that would impair any of the approaches to any of the runways, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, that's good. Did you get a hold of Greg? Is Greg on the line with us today?
Greg is on the call, as is Chris Reese from Mead & Hunt.
Perfect.
So he is prepared to answer. I think he was going to go through some of the work that he had done for the airport master plan, specifically the graphics that are in your packet, and was going to just provide a little background information for the commission's benefit.
Yeah, because I'd like to know I want to make sure my interpretation of this and others' interpretation is correct. So Greg, can you take it from here?
I sure can. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So yeah, I think Mark provided 2 examples that I was going to talk from both ends of runway 1028 here. And this is information that we've put together as part of the master plan that's work that's been done to date. Just a little bit of background on how the obstruction data is obtained. First of all, the FAA has standards for how they collect and how the reporting of the obstacles is done. And there's a survey advisory circular, and we subbed that work out to a company called Quantum Spatial. who specializes in that. And what they do is they actually fly the airport and the areas around the airport at various elevations. And so they pick up aerial, very high resolution aerial photography of the airport and the areas at different elevations. And from that, they can then pick off the elevations very accurately, both the elevations and the coordinates of trees, of roads, buildings, and terrain that surround the airport. And they can also, from that information, map out the planimetrics of the airport. So those be things like the edges of the pavements, the edge lights, the signs, even the pavement markings. All that stuff is pulled from this aerial flight that the Quantum Spatial does. And as part of that process, all this data is then submitted to the FAA. And so that aerial flight that was done back in 2018. And as Mark indicated, you guys got a letter from the FAA identifying those, I don't know, roughly a dozen obstacles. My guess is those were brought to the FAA's attention through this master plan process and through that reporting of the obstruction data. The surfaces that we're showing on this drawing are surfaces that were required to show as part of an airport layout plan. And there's 4 that we're showing here that apply to runway 1028. Now, not all of these surfaces apply to every runway, and the size and the slope of these surfaces vary depending on the category of the runway and aircraft that use it, and the minimums that apply to a runway.
When you say the surfaces, you're relating to the 4 different slopes?
Exactly. Yep. So there's 2 views here on this drawing. One is the plan view that's kind of looking at the airport from the top, and then the sort of the bottom half of that drawing is the profile view.
Yes.
So the plan is kind of showing how those surfaces splay out and where they start in relationship to the end of the runway. And then the profile view down below is showing the various slopes that they extend out from the runway. The flattest one, and I'll just start at the flattest and kind of work to the steepest. The flattest one is what they call a departure surface, an instrument departure surface. And that is a surface that only applies to instrument runways, those that have an instrument approach procedure. And in the case of runway 1028, it's a non-precision instrument approach, but it's still an instrument. The GPS and the LPV approaches to the runway categorize this as having a departure surface. You would not have a departure surface on the crosswind turf runway. Where that differs from the other 3 surfaces is that a surface for taking off from leaving the runway. So if you can imagine planes leaving to the west, that is the airspace that is intended to protect those kinds of operations. It is extremely common for there to be obstacles in a departure surface. But it is an identification surface, and it is one that we do need to show. And a lot of times you'll see on approach procedures, well, they will identify things in the departure surface in a general way. And I believe they have that here at Maury, where they'll say, trees and things in the departure surface. So that's one of the surfaces. The next one up from that is the 34-to-1 slope. That is the Part 77 surface. The Part 77 surface is intended to really be an identification surface for any obstacles to the airspace. Just because something is an obstruction to Part 77 does not necessarily mean it's a hazard to aviation, but it is something that needs to be reported by the FAA. And the intent is that the FAA can look at that and determine, is this something that's unsafe? Is this an obstacle that needs to be dealt with? Moving up, the next one is a 30-to-1, what they call a glide path qualification surface. That surface too is one that's unique to 1028 in that it applies only to those runways that have approaches that provide vertical guidance. So some runways just have lateral guidance through GPS. In the case of 1028 here at Middleton, the GPS not only provides lateral guidance left and right, but up and down guidance to the runway. When you have that kind of approach capability, this GQS surface comes into play. When you have obstructions to the GQS, in my opinion, that's when things start getting serious. I think the FAA would start really looking at that as, okay, now's where the point where you're going to be looking at possibly doing something to raise your minimums or like that. And so it's one that I think is more serious. If you look at this drawing, there are a couple of spots where the trees, especially to the west on that hill, some of the treetops start getting into that 30-to-1 surface. Yep, over there, and they're kind of hard to see, but we tried to circle some of those points that in red. You had to really zoom in to see them. But there's a couple of spots there, and then there's a couple of spots, I believe, even closer to like Father Meinhold's property over there, where some of those trees are getting into that 30-to-1. And then kind of moving on to the next one, the steepest one is the 20-to-1, what they call the threshold sighting surface. And that surface is just exactly what its name says, is again, a serious penetration, something to really consider, that if you have something getting into the threshold sighting surface, the way to rectify that is either remove the obstacle or to displace the threshold. That is really what the FAA would look at, is determining, okay, well, here's where your landing threshold needs to move to if this obstruction is not dealt with, if that makes sense. So, and there are a couple of spots, and I think that was one that maybe, yeah, so Mark, you were sort of illustrating in the navigation easement area there. Those, I think one of those was one that Ponce had identified, of needing to be dealt with. And fortunately, like Mark said, that is an area that the city has a navigation easement for, so that can be addressed.
And I would add that just because there's multiple dots doesn't mean there's multiple trees. They likely are different tree tops of the same tree, or they could easily be part of the same tree.
That's true, and that's a point I wanted to emphasize, is that when Quantum did that aerial photography, they have to do that during leaf on conditions. They can't do it, when the leaves are off the trees. They want that full leaf coverage. They want that full treetop canopy. And so Mark's exactly right that, a lot of those points are probably, different portions of a tree canopy. It could be one tree, could be, maybe a combination of trees there, but those are points that came from that process.
Mark,
so I think I'm not sure, how much more detailed you'd like me to get. I'm certainly willing to.
I have a couple of questions, but I'd like to see the chart. Mark, can you move it up where you can show the slopes? So my question is that, I gotta let Mark go up there. When we fly in, or somebody flies in on the instrument approach, they're coming in on the 20-to-1 line, the sighting. Is that correct?
I believe that's right. Yeah, I think the typical glide. Sorry.
When you raise the minimum, really all you're doing is you're on that line. You're saying within a certain height of the ground, or no, excuse me, relative to the runway, the height relative to the runway, you may only be able to go further down that line, or not as far down that line. So that's when you say raising minimums. That's really what the effect is. It isn't changing the slope of that line or where that line hits the ground. It's just how far down that line you can go.
So when I'm saying minimums, I'm talking about the weather condition minimums.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Right. The slope does not change. But I would.
Or the end of the runway, it always touches the end of the runway.
Yeah, right. Yep. So some of these surfaces start right at the physical end of the runway. So the departure surface, for example, and the GQS, those start right at the end of the runway. For whatever reason, the Part 77 and the threshold sighting, those start 200 feet from the end of the runway. And that's just the FAA standard.
Right.
So
for those that are not pilots, when we talk about raising the minimums, we're just saying as we fly down that 20-to-1 slope, we can only follow it down so far. If it was really clear, and we may be able to go further down that line. And if there's more obstructions, we cannot go as far down that line. I guess that's what I was trying to say.
Right.
But there's anything in here that's concerning to us today, you know,
Yeah, I think the ones that I saw as being the most most critical or be the highest priority of addressing would be the ones that we've sort of put those red circles around, the ones penetrating the 20-to-1 threshold sighting and the 30-to-1 GQS.
yeah, I had a question to Mark, I guess, is when I see that there are houses built, if you go further to the west on this drawing, Mark, and it's, you know, in theory, rooftops there. I mean, how does that relate to the height zoning limitations? I mean, would there, because don't we have an agreement with the town of Middleton on height limitation zoning for what's in the avigation or in the easement there?
Limitation zoning is completely separate from, it's loosely based on this, and it's a good idea to base it on this. But when we created our height limitation zoning ordinance and adopted it back in early, 20 years ago, and it was prepared by the Bureau of Aeronautics, it was a fairly rudimentary approach that simply factored in anything off airport property automatically had a 50-foot allowance for a minimum height. I'm just going by memory here. So the map's posted outside my office. I think it's on our website, although it's hard to read. We are actually, I mean, the idea is the height limitation zoning is supposed to correlate with protection of the runway approach surfaces, and it generally does. It's just there's not as much finesse to it. Now that with computers being more advanced and GIS mapping capability, it's possible to have a much more robust height limitation zoning ordinance. I have done some initial work with the Bureau of Aeronautics to use their resources to develop a new height limitation zoning ordinance, but I stopped. We didn't get very far because I realized it didn't make sense to do this until we complete our master plan.
Mhm.
So that's why I haven't brought it to the body. So yes, the idea of using height limitation zoning to help control or regulate the airspace, to supplement that with land ownership and easements, those are all different tools for protecting airspace.
My observation and my question is, I know the town of Middleton is very sensitive to noise. Noise is a function of how close they are to the airspace and the glide slopes. And I wonder if they were aware of that when they allowed these houses to be built.
Well, I think there's been awareness of the airport, obviously. The airport runway was realigned back in, again, 18 years ago now, 17 years ago. The planning for it began longer ago than that, but it opened, and the plane started flying the new alignment in 2004. The subdivision that you see here, I don't remember the name of the subdivision, but it is probably about 15 to 20 years old. I don't remember the exact timing of it.
So this was,
but I will add, it is in an area of the town where the city agreed in an intergovernmental agreement with the town from 1994. The city
right.
said it would not contest or object to, I guess is the word I should use, subdivision of land and development in sections 5 and 6 of the town.
Yeah, I know that the city gave away the extraterritorial powers. I guess my observation and comment was, even though we don't have the powers, I mean, this is something that I would think responsibly the town of Middleton would manage, I guess, the building and where things were for the benefit of their citizens. I mean, that's just my observation. But if this glide slope was built and the airport was redone back, if the houses are pre-existent, obviously the FAA didn't have an issue with it. And so I guess it's not worthy of even talking about. But it's just, it's like all parts have to work together here if you're going to try to eliminate some of these issues that we seem to be discussing on a regular basis. But that's my comments. Airport commissioners, do you have any questions you want to ask Greg about this, especially those of you on the AMPAC, because this is information that you're gonna have to deal with. So you might as well bone up on it and be ready. Robert, do you have any questions, or Kevin or Ray?
I don't at this time. I
Okay.
mean, you're asking the right questions, John, but I don't have any additional questions at this
Okay.
time.
Kevin?
I don't have any questions at this time, but when it's an agenda item, I really want to get back to the club root cause analysis, the requirements for noise sensitive development around airports, all of the basic requirements of an airport, you know, and so now's not really the time to do it. I want it as a separate agenda item so we can really discuss, you know, what the root causes of these problems and how the FAA and the AIP really reaches out to people and says, don't allow encroachment around airports and all of that. But now's not really the time to do it. I want it as a separate agenda item if I could.
Yeah, okay. Ray, how about you? You have any questions, Ray?
I don't see him.
Okay, that's
He may
fine.
have stepped away for a moment.
How about Michelle, Dave, Luke? Any
Not for
questions?
me, John.
You good?
I'm good.
Yeah,
Michelle?
none for me. Thank you. The points you bring up are very educational and informative for me, so thank you.
Great. David?
Thanks. All good.
Okay, good.
John, I'd like to say something now that I'm turned on again.
Well, we're not taking any public comments, sir. So,
Great.
That's right.
I also never muted you, Steve.
yeah, okay. Anyway, so with that, I don't have any questions. If anybody doesn't have any questions of the tree trimming and obstacles, then I'd like to move on to the next item.
Did Ray's question get addressed?
Ray didn't ask any question.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, I did. I'm trying to ask a question.
Okay, I'm sorry, Ray, go ahead. We didn't hear you.
Well, it's more of a comment. I think that regarding the planning of the additional questions or information needed for the meeting on the planning of the airport, I think we need to have Greg Stern present on meetings like that. I mean, he's the one that's got all of the information and so knowledgeable.
Well, I'll leave that up to the chair of AMPAC, Mark and Greg, but I would think that it would be beneficial to have Greg in attendance.
Greg has not missed a minute of AMPAC meetings, so.
Okay,
we'll be
I'm
there.
sure he hasn't. Okay. All right, folks, let's go ahead and we'll move on to the next issue. We were left it last time that we were going to, that Rob and I don't know if anybody's had a time to work on it, but Rob and Mark were going to add some information to the website. And also we've tried to do a little bit of geographic analysis, which is why we collect the data on noise. So I'm going to turn this back over to you, Mark. And by the way, Greg Stern, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, John. Yep.
You attending. Go ahead, Mark, carry it away.
So, yeah, I'm happy to defer to Robert as well. He and I have spoken on a couple occasions now, and he has, well, why don't I just turn over to Robert since you're the elected
Sure.
official. And
Robert, you've got the floor.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, with the holidays, I will admit I didn't push real hard in December, did a little bit more here at the end. Have kind of a possible proposal, I'd say, for just some additional information. But as sorry, let me take a step back. Additional kind of like helpful tips on what we're looking for when somebody makes a noise report. You know, what gets the most beneficial information. You know, because the purpose of reporting for everybody is to, transmit useful information. Whether, we want useful information, the person making the report wants to give us useful information. Otherwise, it's just a waste of everybody's time, right? So try to put together some helpful tips, I guess I'd call them, instructions, whatever you want to call them, that could be put on the website for when people call in. I also am suggesting that we kind of relay it out a little bit to make it one location where you could go for whether you're going to call in information, log it in on your computer, or request, basically get a hard copy printout of the reporting form. It would just be kind of relaying out the web page a little bit. But then when I got into what we discussed last month, which is there's certain required information that's not even really being listed currently as required. I think a little bit of work needs to be done on the actual form itself to, make it a little bit more streamlined, easier for people to use, also clearly identifying the information that, we need as kind of a minimum to use, have a useful report out of this whole thing. So
we toyed at one time with mandatory fields, but we got some serious pushback on that.
Well, we actually already do currently have some mandatory fields. I guess the question is, are we getting in the information we need currently through the mandatory fields? And one of the biggest things is we don't know kind of like where the area is. I mean, let's say, I call in a noise complaint and I'm out in the town of Verona, for instance. I mean, that's great that I heard noise from a plane, but me reporting it doesn't help the airport know where the noise is an issue. So it is.
You have to have an address.
Yeah, and I think part of what you were talking about, John, is there was pushback on the making it mandatory in terms of the users submitting of the complaints, providing their address for fear of retaliation by the subsequent flights.
Yes, you are correct, but I mean, it's kind of you're in trouble if you do, in trouble if you don't. I mean, we can't. The data is not useful without a GeoPoint.
Right. Yeah, I was just saying, just clarifying in terms of the.
No, I understand why they did it, and I think we acquiesced to that point to say, great, then we won't collect it. But then on the other hand, then we can't use it. But thanks, Luke. Point well made. Robert, one thing that I think after we've tried to use the data was the fact that you might put in there things that you shouldn't do, like they're trying to use fields for things other than they were designed for. And then when we go to retrieve the data to use it any meaningful way, it can't be retrieved, or if it is retrievable, it's pretty darn hard.
Yeah, I don't have specifics on that because I guess I'm not clear as to.
Mark might, because he had to retrieve all of this to be able to produce these drawings.
Sure.
A lot of handwork.
I'm willing to, if we're seeing that certain fields are being filled out incorrectly, I'm more than happy to adjust the form to make it clear where certain information is ideally supposed to go. But I think just generally speaking, laying out the form a little differently, both the online version and the printed out version for if people want to, download it, basically, I think we can make the form a little bit more user friendly as well. And again, make it very clear what information is useful to letting us know the time, the location where this plane overflight occurred, so that we can work back to figure out when was this noise being made, where was the plane located at the time, was the pilot doing what they're required to do, And were they following our guidance, which it's voluntary noise abatement, but it still gives us a chance to reach out to a pilot who may not be aware of our noise abatement procedures.
Do you have a copy of the FAA guidelines for the noise complaint data?
I can find that. I remember I found that once before. Let me look, see if I can find it.
We should make sure that you have that, because really the form is designed to collect data in a way that's required by the FAA for their purposes, because they're the police of the skies. So we're really collecting it on their behalf, but we're
Sure.
also trying to use it for our purposes too.
Well, I wasn't recommending changing the information collected. I was just talking about laying it out where you could actually. I think people are starting to fill out the form, and like they peter out maybe before they filled in. We put some of the mandatory fields at the very end of the form.
Yeah.
If it's mandatory, it should be top and front and center. And then they fill it out, and then we have the mandatory fields that we need to use for the FAA.
Yeah. Maybe we should highlight some of those things in different colors, or identify that it's a mandatory field. So, well, why don't you and Mark take that offline and then make a proposal? Bring it back.
Yeah, we do use an asterisk system to say what's mandatory, but it admittedly doesn't stand out very much.
Yeah.
So I think we can make this and tweak it to make it more user friendly. I will remind you that the form itself and how it's structured is using a template or using the system, the city's existing request tracker system.
Yeah.
So there are other. Let me see if I can find it easy. Yeah. So here's a list of all the forms. For example. Mowing and weed complaints, for example, you'll see that there's a similar interface here with name, address, etc., location, and just a description of the problem in this case. Here on this page for mowing and weed complaints, the city provided some additional, introductory information, and that's the sort of thing that Robert was talking about, is we want to provide some additional instructions. We don't currently have that with our noise complaint form. We just go straight to, the description of the complaint. There isn't any other instruction at the top.
Well, why don't you take it offline, come up with a proposal, take a look at it, and then we'll put it back on the agenda.
And then to elaborate on the geographic, Robert, were you done with your remarks?
Yeah, just to say that we do have some of those instructions or tips available. I just don't know that it's worth sharing at this time. I think there's still enough work to do that it's worth bringing it back to the next meeting. So
yeah, no sense. Yeah. When you're not ready, you're not ready. So
we're not ready.
Okay, we'll do it next time then. Okay, thanks, Robert.
Sure.
So what I did with the, is it okay if I go ahead?
Yeah, go
Please
ahead.
do.
So what I did with the maps that are in your packet, those are courtesy of my coworker Daphne, who's our mapping guru, GIS guru. I took the spreadsheet that Rich Morey and his staff maintain, and I took the data as best as I could from that spreadsheet and captured the address information, put it all in a consistent format, and supplied that in a table to Daphne, where I segregated it by year, or in the case of 2020 last year, I divided it into the first half of the year and the last half of the year. And the reason I did that was because we, of course, changed the voluntary noise abatement procedure for the latter half of the year. So and then for that last drawing, second half of last year, I then superimposed Daphne superimposed the flight tracks that Mead and Hunt has been working on based on the data that they have collected from both the public and from various tracking data that are out there. And so this is something that's being developed for the airport master plan, and it shows the generalized flight tracks, touch and go flight tracks. That doesn't mean there aren't planes flying in other locations, and we all know that does happen. We've heard about that tonight, but this is has generalized the flight pattern. You can see how it bends to the right a little bit, as most pilots will do that little weave to the north before they make their left turn once they reach 1,000 feet above ground level. This is the pattern for westbound takeoffs, and then this is the one for eastbound takeoffs. And then superimpose the data points. I grouped the complaints into different categories, and then use the size and color to show frequency of complaints at a particular location. None of this is identifiable to a specific house, in my view. It generally shows the neighborhood, and it's close to, close to the source of the complaint.
My takeaway from this is, the number one takeaway, first of all, is that this is the generalized area of operations. It may not be exact, based on plane performance. Some of them may be tighter loops. Some of them may be a little bigger. It also may change based on loading. But for all practical purposes, airplanes are going to operate in this area. And that's just a fact. And I mean, I can't apologize for it. It's just a fact. And that anything that there's not really much that anybody's going to be able to do, as long as pilots are operating legally, which I believe for the majority they probably are. I'm not saying somebody doesn't bust an altitude every now and then. I mean, hell, all of us have done that. But we try within the capabilities of the equipment. But I kind of think it's what's expected, except for I'm a little curious of a couple of the dots, but I mean, that's what you'd expect, I suspect,
And I would add that there are a few additional complaints. By a few, I mean less than 10 that are not included on the map because they were off the scale. For example, one was up from Crystal Lake in Northwest Dane County, where the person in their report indicated, and it was a one-time complaint, indicated that there had been repeated flying of an aircraft. And so they called this airport. I don't even know if they, I'm not sure that they knew that it was specifically connected to the airport, but we received it as a complaint and it's mapped. It's just not shown on this because of scale. We had a complaint from someone outside of Lodi, and then there's been a few complaints from Cross Plains as well. We had a crop duster, I think it was last year, that generated 6 or however many complaints. It was half a dozen complaints or so, including some anonymous ones. And so because that was unique to that property and not to the overall operation of the airport, I didn't map that data either, because I didn't have address information for most of those callers.
I mean, what we're concerned about, we're concerned about all flights in all areas, but the topic that we most often discuss is the operations in, I'll call it the aerodrome, in the area immediately around the airport, specifically caused by pattern operations. And so that's my personal observation. Is I think it's what you would expect. I don't know what else to say. I mean, commissioners, do you have any observations or comments?
Yeah, I have a comment regarding what are we as pilots going to do in the future when they start delivering packages by drone to all these houses that are in and around the area. And I just read a report about that. In the next 3 years, that's going to start. And operational wise, they'll be coming from 400 feet. So I think from a noise standpoint, it's going to really change the level of noise that we're currently getting.
But there's clearly the FAA is going to have to sort out airspace.
Yeah, and they say they've done all of that. And, the 400 foot is the altitude.
Yes.
But boy, it's going to be noisy around town.
Well, if it's 500 foot or 400 foot above the pavement, And with respect to the surrounding topography, it's going to be pretty close to the ground. But I'll leave that to the FAA to sort out.
I mean, that's just
enough to
another
deal with
problem
here.
the city can address.
It's going to be a different world. I mean, that's
It is.
the issue that people are going to have to deal with in the future. It's not airplanes, it's UAVs.
That's right.
Yeah. So, any other commissioners, do you have any questions, comments, observations?
I would just weigh in and say these maps are really helpful to me. I mean, before this, I have seen the Excel spreadsheets that show, you know, about where things were located, but I couldn't visualize that this type of a map really helps, where you see not only where the calls are coming from, but you see if there's more calls in one area than another. I think that's really the whole point of trying to gather this information. Because I think now, you know, with this type of information, we have a chance to see where problems are and see what we can do to make it better.
I would say we had about 90% of the data, that maybe a little more than 90%, where we could properly identify addresses and sources. There are some anonymous reports. For example, someone left a message they were on Friendship Lane, which is in the city. And so the way that got mapped is it just took the center point of Friendship Lane, which is a street that's half a mile, well, several blocks long. And so it just, you know, it mapped it approximately. So we did the best we could, but I would say 90% of the complaints we were able to map, but oftentimes there wasn't enough information. We just had, you know, a phone number, or sometimes a first name, or sometimes, you know, it was not always straightforward to know where it was located, what the source was, but we could piece together enough information to map it properly.
Well, you know, I've been saying for over a year that, you know, this is why we collect the data, and it has to be in a usable format. If the neighborhood groups have access to, you know, they're more than willing to take this data, and these are the maps that should go to the FAA during the planning process. All right. And this is, you know, they could see it in the aggregate and they could respond to it appropriately, but it can't be used if it's not properly collected. And the collection is really a function of how people make the complaints. And that's, I really want to push people to use the forms online and use the data, because we can get it back. And I think that's incredibly important. Otherwise, why collect the data?
Right. John, I have two comments.
Go ahead, Rich.
Yeah, and Richard Morris speaking. We don't have the patterns for the grass runways depicted that may indicate why we have a certain larger purple or magenta dot kind of away from a lot of traffic. That's also certainly where we might see an early turnout. One other thing that I'm just beginning to become aware of, I believe that we may have one person that's kind of acting as a reporting resource for a neighborhood, which is why we might see, you know, it is so important that individuals report what's going on at their address versus funneling into someone else. I may be wrong with that, but there have been a couple of people that have suggested that maybe someone is collecting all the information for their neighborhood and reporting for it, or at least a fair bit of it.
People need their individual complaints. If you don't want this aberration, then people need to make complaints, and we need to get the locations associated with them. Otherwise, this is all that the FAA has to work from. And I agree that it would be useful in a different color to superimpose the other traffic patterns.
It's an excellent comment. Rich, thank you for making that comment. I'll see what we can do about adding that, because the pattern you're describing is when you take off to the north, you then make a counterclockwise turn and you come back this way. I simply was to take, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, exactly right, Mark.
Yeah, no, I simply was taking, I think this was John's suggestion actually, was to take because he had seen this in the airport master plan materials. And so, and I thought John's suggestion was really good, but I focused on that because that's the noise pattern that has changed, and that's what we've been focusing so much on. But there definitely are noise complaints associated with the use of runway 119.
Well, this provides us a frame of reference, because dots without knowing where patterns are, you know, you need to be able to assess the two. Did in the report that Mead and Hunt put out, Mark, that we lifted this pattern from, did they have one for the other runway?
Greg, you're on the line still. Can you refresh my memory?
I don't believe we had one for the other runway, and I can't remember why we didn't put that on there. I think I would have to take that back to our noise folks to find out why we didn't. I think they did account for operations on the other runway in evaluating the noise. I'm just not sure why they didn't illustrate it on that particular.
I think the reason we only used this one, I think that was the only one that was available.
Greg, if you, I'm sure that Travis provided information for the 119 also, if that's where you're mining some of this information from. So,
yep.
Why don't we look for it and see if we can add it, and if not, maybe we can synthesize it, and then we can add it to the drawing. And I think these are useful, and you know, maybe we do this, you know, once a quarter, once every 6 months, as kind of a review, just to kind of see where we're at. And so, to me, this is more meaningful than just doing a la carte, you know, one complaint at a time.
Yeah, the environmental settings chapter only does show the pattern for the primary runway.
That's why we only added one. That was the only one I saw.
Right.
Otherwise, I would have suggested put both of them in there.
I'm sorry, I didn't think
I'll see if I can find you some data.
Okay, that'd be great. Thanks, David.
Oops.
The visual is very helpful.
Okay. Commissioners, do you have any questions or comments on this issue? Okay. So I have then, for future events, we will see if we can refine these maps. And then we will try to tighten up our data collection, so we can make sure we have usable data and provide some guidance to those using the form. I have a budget comparison to actual to year-to-date, or budget to actual, and also I'll try to do previous year actual to this year actual. So that'll give us those points that Luke asked. Does anybody else have any thing that potentially would be useful that you could think of? If not, you can always send an email to me, and I will do my best to try to see where it fits and get it added in.
And John, when you said data collection, you're referring to the noise, the website, the noise complaint form that Robert and I are working on.
Yes, more than the online though, because I think Robert also alluded to the paper form.
Understood.
Right, so basically it's a data collection. I look at it in double quotes as kind of a category. I think that's it for this session. Would anybody like to make a motion to adjourn?
I will make that motion. This is Luke.
Luke, I have a motion to adjourn from Luke. Do I have a second? I'll second it. So we have a motion to adjourn and a second. Is there any additional discussion? Hearing none, call the motion. All in favor of adjourning, say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Okay, so we are officially completed the airport commission meeting for January of 2021.
Thank you.
Their participation.